Hi, I'm Maya. I was working late at Horizon Dynamics when they called me in without warning. The CEO looked me in the eye and fired me, said I was being terminated for insubordination. Then she revealed the truth: they needed someone gone before the audit uncovered what they were hiding. No warning, no explanation, no dignity, just a cold stare, an empty box, and my career erased in 10 seconds. But what they didn't know was that while they were busy trying to bury their secrets, I was already preparing to unearth everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I remember the exact moment everything changed. The digital clock on my monitor read 7:43 p.m. I'd been at my desk for nearly 12 hours, sifting through financial anomalies I discovered in our procurement system. The office had emptied hours ago, just the usual skeleton crew of security and a few dedicated developers on the 32nd floor. The evening cleaning staff hadn't even made it to my section yet. My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria Reeves, our CEO, conference room A. Now. No please. No context. Just a command that felt heavier than it should have. I saved my files, locked my screen, and straightened my blouse before walking down the empty corridor. The lights in the executive wing were dimmed to half brightness, creating long shadows that seemed to follow me toward the frosted glass doors of conference room A. Victoria wasn't alone. Beside her sat Marcus Chen, head of legal, his expression carefully blank. And Danielle Porter, HR director, tapping something into her tablet without looking up. The energy in the room was wrong, tense, like a wire pulled too tight. Maya, Victoria said, not rising from her seat. Her voice was cool, professional. The same voice she used in quarterly reviews when announcing layoffs. Please sit. I stayed standing. What's this about? Victoria glanced at Marcus, who slid a folder across the polished table. We're terminating your employment, effective immediately. The words hit like ice water. I'd been with Horizon Dynamics for 8 years. Senior financial analyst. Top performance reviews every quarter. I'd built their risk assessment protocols from scratch. On what grounds? My voice remained steady, though my pulse hammered in my throat. Insubordination, Danielle finally looked up. Multiple instances. Questioning leadership decisions. Pursuing investigations outside your department's scope. Refusing to follow direct orders regarding confidential matters. I almost laughed. You mean doing my job? Finding financial irregularities is literally in my job description. Victoria's expression hardened. Your access has already been revoked. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. That's when I noticed. The box on the chair beside Marcus. Empty. Waiting. They'd planned this before I even walked in. This is about the procurement audit, isn't it? I said quietly. Something flickered across Victoria's face, a micro-expression of alarm quickly masked by corporate indifference. This is about your inability to function as a team player. I picked up the folder, opened it. The termination papers were already printed, dated 2 days ago. You've been planning this. Maya, Marcus interjected, his voice almost gentle, almost apologetic. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I studied the three of them, Victoria's cold composure, Marcus's practiced neutrality, Danielle's avoidance. These were people I'd worked alongside for years. Victoria had once praised me as the backbone of financial integrity at the company holiday party. Now they wouldn't even meet my eyes. The audit findings, I said. Where are they? That's no longer your concern, Victoria replied. We've assigned another analyst to review your work. Who? A soft knock at the door answered my question. Rebecca Winters walked in, her expression a perfect mask of professional sympathy. Mid-30s, MBA from Wharton, hired just 6 months ago. She'd spent those months shadowing me, asking questions about our systems, our protocols, our override capabilities. Sorry I'm late, she said, not sounding sorry at all. Traffic. Victoria's posture relaxed slightly. Rebecca will be taking over your responsibilities, effective immediately. She's already been briefed on the transition. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about insubordination. This was about burying what I'd found. I see, I said, my voice calm despite the storm building inside me. You need someone who won't ask questions. Victoria's smile tightened. We need someone who understands. Chain of command. Someone who knows when certain matters are best handled internally. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I looked at Rebecca, who had the decency to flush slightly under my gaze. The discrepancies. In the Singapore accounts, I said to her. The duplicate invoices from shell companies. The missing documentation on the Meridian project. You know what you're covering up, right? That's enough, Victoria snapped, standing now. Security is waiting outside. I closed the folder slowly, deliberately. 8 years. I built your risk assessment framework. I designed your audit protocols. I trained your entire financial compliance team. And we appreciate your contributions, Marcus said smoothly. Your severance package is quite generous. I looked at the folder in my hands. In exchange for my silence, I assume? No one answered. They didn't need to. You should know, I said, voice perfectly level, that I don't sign anything without reading it first. And I don't stay silent when something's wrong. That's not who I am. Victoria's expression hardened into something almost cruel. Who you are, Maya, is unemployed. Who you are is someone about to learn how small this industry can be when you don't play by its rules. The threat wasn't subtle. Finance was a connected world. One call from Victoria could close doors across the city. I placed the folder back on the table, unopened. I think I'll have my lawyer review this. You have 30 minutes to clear your desk, Danielle said, finally looking up from her tablet. A security officer will accompany you. I walked out. Without another word, past the burly security guard waiting by the elevator. My mind was already racing, calculating, planning. They thought they'd caught me off guard, but what they didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this possibility for weeks. The walk to my desk felt surreal. Colleagues still working late looked up, then quickly away when they saw the security guard trailing behind me. News would spread by morning. The story would be carefully crafted. Difficult employee, couldn't adapt, questioned leadership too often. I sat at my desk one last time, looking at the familiar space I'd occupied for nearly a decade. Photos of my sister's wedding. A small, potted succulent that had somehow survived years of neglect. Awards for financial innovation that now seemed like cruel jokes. I didn't have much personal property to pack. That wasn't what mattered now. What mattered was what I'd already secured elsewhere. 3 weeks earlier, I discovered the first red flag in our procurement system. Invoices for services never rendered. Payments to companies that existed only on paper. Approval signatures that didn't match their exemplars in our database. At first, I thought it was sloppy bookkeeping, maybe even an isolated case of fraud by a mid-level manager. But then I found the pattern. The irregularities all connected to the Meridian project, our company's largest defense contract, worth over $500 million. Money was flowing out, documentation was missing, and the trail led directly to executive approvals. I'd followed protocol. Documented everything, prepared a preliminary report, and submitted it through proper channels. The response had been swift: leave this one alone. Special project. Need to know basis. But that wasn't who I was. It wasn't how I worked. Financial integrity wasn't optional in my book. So I'd kept digging, kept documenting. And I'd been careful, using my personal devices after hours, securing evidence offsite, creating backups. That couldn't be wiped remotely. As the security guard hovered impatiently, I placed my company ID on the desk, unplugged my personal phone charger, and picked up the small box of belongings. I left the awards behind. They meant nothing now. I'm ready, I told the guard. He nodded, almost apologetic. I need to check the box. I handed it over without comment. There was nothing to find. Nothing physical, anyway. The elevator ride down was silent, awkward. In the lobby, a few late workers glanced up, then away. The shame of the escorted exit was by design, a warning. To others, a ritual humiliation meant to diminish. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. The city lights blurred slightly as unexpected tears formed. I blinked them away. This wasn't the time for that. I walked to the corner, out of sight of the building's cameras, and hailed a rideshare. As I waited, I powered up my personal phone and sent a single text to a number I'd memorized weeks ago. Package delivered. Rain check cancelled. The response came seconds later: received. Meeting still on. I exhaled slowly, feeling the first genuine calm since receiving Victoria's text. They thought they'd silenced me. They thought wrong. The ride home was a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. My apartment felt too quiet, too empty when I arrived. I set the box down on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. 8 years reduced to a plant. Some photos, and a coffee mug. I moved methodically after that. Laptop open. Secure drive connected. VPN activated. The documentation I'd been gathering for weeks was organized, encrypted, backed up in multiple locations. Not just on physical drives but distributed across secure cloud storage only I could access. I pulled up the folder labeled Insurance Policy and began reviewing the contents. Screenshots of suspicious transactions. Emails with questionable approvals. Financial reports with numbers that didn't add up. The evidence was substantial but still circumstantial. I needed more to prove intentional fraud rather than incompetence. My phone buzzed with messages of surprise and support from colleagues who had already heard the news. Word traveled fast. I responded minimally, carefully, giving nothing away. At midnight, I made coffee and pulled up Horizon's employee handbook on my personal laptop. I knew the termination protocols well, I'd helped refine them years ago. Standard procedure was to cut access immediately, wipe company devices, and change security credentials. But I also knew the gaps in their system. The legacy access points that remained active during transition periods. The backup servers that synced on delay. The audit logs that captured every keystroke but were only reviewed during quarterly assessments. By 2 a.m., I had mapped out exactly what they would do to erase me from the system and exactly how I could stay one step ahead. I wasn't planning anything illegal, just ensuring I maintained visibility into what they were trying to hide. I finally fell asleep as dawn broke, my mind still spinning with calculations and contingencies. When I woke 3 hours later, I had 17 missed calls and 38 text messages. News of my termination had spread throughout the financial division. Former colleagues wanted details. Industry connections offered condolences and quiet job inquiries. I ignored most of them. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. At precisely 9 a.m., I made one call, to Eleanor Vega, a former colleague who'd left Horizon 2 years ago to join the Securities and Exchange Commission. Maya, she answered on the first ring. I heard. What happened? I found something they didn't want found, I said simply. A pause. How bad? Bad enough that they fired me without warning and are rewriting the narrative as we speak. Eleanor's voice lowered. The Meridian contracts? My pulse quickened. You know about them? Rumors. Whispers. Nothing concrete enough to open a formal investigation. Another pause. Yet. I have more than rumors, I said. Careful, Maya. These waters get deep fast. I'm already swimming, Eleanor. Might as well head for shore. We arranged to meet that afternoon at a small cafe 10 blocks from Horizon's headquarters, close enough to be convenient, far enough to avoid company eyes. While waiting for our meeting, I checked my special email account, one Victoria and Horizon's IT team didn't know existed. I'd set it up years ago as part of my role in creating security protocols, a test account that had somehow never been deactivated. It still received internal system notifications. 3 new messages had arrived overnight. System access logs. Permission changes. New user credentials. They had wiped my official access, as expected. But they had also done something else. Assigned my security clearance level to Rebecca Winters. Not standard procedure for a termination. This was a targeted replacement. More interesting was what they hadn't done. The financial audit database still showed my initiated review as in progress rather than reassigned or terminated. They hadn't touched my findings yet. They were being careful, methodical, making sure they understood exactly what I knew before they began altering records. That gave me time. Not much, but enough. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Eleanor, professional but understated. Nothing that would draw attention if someone from Horizon happened to see me. The cafe was busy when I arrived, full of the late morning crowd of remote workers and business meetings. Eleanor was already there, tucked into a corner booth, her SEC badge nowhere in sight. Smart. She looked up as I approached, her expression giving nothing away. You look better than expected for someone who just got fired, she said as I sat down. I had warning signs. I prepared. She nodded approvingly. Always the analyst, seeing patterns before anyone else. I didn't waste time. I slid a sealed envelope across the table. Access codes to a secure drive. Everything I've documented so far. Eleanor didn't touch it. Is this legally obtained information? Every document is either publicly available through proper channels or accessible through my legitimate credentials at the time I accessed it. Nothing was taken after termination. Nothing was accessed through improper means. She studied me for a moment, then took the envelope. What am I looking for? Approximately $42 million in defense contract funds diverted through shell companies over the past 16 months. All tied to the Meridian project. All approved by the same 3 executives. Eleanor's expression remained neutral, but I saw the slight widening of her eyes. $42 million? That's what I could confirm. I suspect it's just the surface. She slipped the envelope into her bag. This isn't enough for the SEC to move on. Not yet. I know. But it's enough to justify looking deeper. Why did they fire you now? Why not months ago when you first started looking into this? I sipped my coffee, gathering my thoughts. The defense contract audit. It's scheduled for next week. External auditors who won't be as easy to control as internal team members. They needed me gone before those auditors arrived, and they needed someone in my position who would help redirect attention. Rebecca Winters. I nodded. Hired 6 months ago. Spent all that time learning my systems, my protocols. They've been planning this. Eleanor leaned forward. Maya, these are serious allegations against powerful people. If what you're saying is true, it is. Then you need to be extremely careful. People have disappeared for less. I knew she wasn't being melodramatic. Financial fraud at this level involved serious players, often with connections beyond the corporate world. I have safeguards in place, I assured her. Digital breadcrumbs. That will release everything automatically if anything happens to me. She sighed. Always 3 steps ahead. It's why they're so afraid of you. We finished our coffee, discussing next steps. Eleanor couldn't promise immediate action, but she could get the right eyes looking in the right places. It was a start. As we parted outside the cafe, Eleanor squeezed my hand. Watch your back. And Maya? Don't do anything I wouldn't do. I smiled thinly. That still leaves quite a range of options. Back in my apartment, I began phase 2 of my plan. While Eleanor worked official channels, I had my own approach. I created a secure document detailing everything I knew, everything I suspected, with all supporting evidence linked and annotated. I wasn't going to leak it, not yet. That would be reckless, potentially harmful to any official investigation. Instead, I set up a digital deadman switch. If I didn't enter a specific code every 72 hours, the document would automatically be sent to 5 specific people: a financial crimes reporter at the Wall Street Journal, 2 FBI agents specializing in corporate fraud, Eleanor, and my attorney. Insurance policy in place, I turned to immediate concerns. Victoria would be working to discredit me professionally, making it difficult to find new employment. I needed to control that narrative. I drafted careful messages to key industry contacts, stating simply that I had left Horizon due to ethical differences regarding financial compliance procedures. No accusations, no details, just enough to plant seeds of doubt about the official story. By evening, the first public move from Horizon appeared. An internal memo, leaked to industry circles, detailing my history of insubordination and refusal to follow established protocols. The character assassination had begun. I wasn't surprised, but the speed was telling. They were worried. My phone rang, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Maya Sullivan? A male voice, unfamiliar. Speaking. My name is Terrence Walsh. I'm a partner at Integrity Financial Investigations. I understand you recently departed from Horizon Dynamics. My guard immediately went up. News travels fast. In our business, it does. A pause. Especially when someone with your reputation for thoroughness leaves suddenly. What exactly does Integrity Financial Investigations do, Mr. Walsh? We work with regulatory bodies to build cases. Sometimes governmental, sometimes private sector. We're particularly interested in defense contract irregularities. My pulse quickened. And how did you get my number? Eleanor Vega suggested I call. Said you might have insights valuable to an ongoing matter. Eleanor hadn't mentioned this. But it made sense she wouldn't, not in a public cafe where anyone might overhear. I'm listening, I said cautiously. Not over the phone, Walsh replied. If you're interested in continuing this conversation, I'll text you an address. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. After he hung up, I immediately called Eleanor. Did you give my number to Terrence Walsh? I asked when she answered. I did. He's legitimate. One of the good ones. She paused. He has resources I don't, Maya. And connections that could help protect you. Protection? You think I need protection? Her silence was answer enough. The text from Walsh arrived. Moments later, an address in the financial district, a private investigation firm with a solid reputation. I spent the evening researching Walsh and his organization, confirming they were who they claimed to be. That night, I dreamed of falling, of papers scattering in the wind, of Victoria's cold smile as she watched me disappear. I woke at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, reaching for financial reports that weren't there. Outside my window, the city glowed with the peculiar emptiness of early morning. In skyscrapers across downtown, cleaning crews prepared offices for the next day's work. In one of those buildings, someone was probably already working to erase evidence of what I'd found. But they didn't know what I knew. Digital footprints never fully disappear. Every deletion leaves traces. Every altered record creates inconsistencies. Every lie requires more lies to maintain. And I had spent 8 years building systems designed to find exactly those kinds of inconsistencies. As dawn broke, I made a decision. This wasn't just about exposing fraud anymore. This was about reclaiming my reputation, my career, my life. Victoria and her co-conspirators had taken something from me, believing they could simply replace me with someone more compliant. They had made a critical error in their calculations. They had treated me as a problem to eliminate rather than recognizing the real threat. I wasn't just good at finding financial irregularities. I was good at finding the truth. And the truth, once found, has a way of demanding to be heard. I arrived at Integrity Financial Investigations precisely at 10 a.m. The office occupied the entire 42nd floor of a gleaming downtown tower, all glass and steel and quiet money. The reception area was understated yet immaculate, with none of the flashy corporate artwork that dominated Horizon's lobby. This was a place designed for discretion, not impression. Ms. Sullivan. A tall man with silver-streaked hair approached, hand extended. Terrence Walsh. Thank you for coming. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct and assessing. I recognized the look. He was evaluating me, determining if I was worth the risk. Let's talk in my office, he said, leading me down a corridor lined with frosted glass doors. Unlike Horizon's open floor plan designed to project transparency while actually enabling constant surveillance, these offices were built for privacy. Walsh's corner office offered sweeping views of the city. I could see Horizon Tower from here, gleaming in the morning sun, oblivious to the storm gathering around it. Please, sit. Walsh gestured to a chair across from his desk. Coffee? I declined. I'd prefer to understand why I'm here. He smiled slightly. Direct. Good. He sat across from me. For the past 11 months, my firm has been building a case on defense contract fraud across multiple corporations. One of those corporations is Horizon Dynamics. I kept my expression neutral despite my surprise. 11 months? That predates my discoveries. Yes. Walsh leaned forward. Your work actually intersected with our investigation. When you began flagging irregularities in the Meridian project, it created quite a stir among certain parties we've been monitoring. Is that why they fired me? Because I was getting too close to something you were already watching? Walsh's expression remained measured. Not exactly. They fired you because you were getting too close to something much bigger than even you realized. He pressed a button on his desk, and the windows instantly frosted over. From a drawer, he withdrew a secure tablet and slid it across to me. The Meridian project isn't just one defense contract, he said as I took the device. It's a convergence point for multiple government initiatives across 3 agencies. The financial irregularities you discovered? They're just the surface level of a much deeper operation. I looked down at the tablet. On screen was a complex network diagram showing money flows, corporate entities, and individual names. At the center was Horizon Dynamics. Branching outward were dozens of shell companies, some of which I'd already identified. But beyond those were connections I hadn't seen, links to foreign investment groups, offshore accounts, and several names I recognized as high-ranking government officials. I struggled to find the right word. Extensive? Alarming? Treasonous? Walsh supplied. All of the above. I scrolled through the diagram, recognizing patterns that matched my own findings while discovering whole new dimensions. To the fraud. How much money are we talking about? The total we've confirmed so far is just under $370 million. But we believe the actual figure approaches $500 million. I felt physically ill. The scale was staggering. And Victoria Reeves? Marcus Chen? How high does this go at Horizon? Walsh's expression darkened. All the way to the board. Victoria is a major player, but not the architect. That would be Lawrence Blackwood. The name hit me like a physical blow. Lawrence Blackwood, chairman of Horizon's board, former Deputy Secretary of Defense, and one of the most connected power brokers in the industry. I'd only met him twice in my 8 years at the company. Both times, he'd barely acknowledged my existence. I set the tablet down, trying to process the implications. This is beyond corporate fraud. This is national security. Walsh finished for me. Which is why we've been building this case meticulously, carefully, making absolutely certain before we move. And what does this have to do with me? Walsh studied me for a moment. You have something we need, Ms. Sullivan. Access and knowledge that would take us months to develop independently. I don't have access anymore. They cut me off completely. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. Did they? Completely? The question hung in the air between us. I thought of my legacy test account, still mysteriously active. The backup servers that maintained shadow copies of transactions for disaster recovery. The audit logging system I designed with intentional redundancies that the executive team had never fully understood. Perhaps not completely, I conceded. We need evidence that will stand up in court, Walsh said. Documentation that proves intent, not just circumstance. The kind of evidence that would be very difficult for outside investigators to identify. Without intimate knowledge of Horizon's financial systems. I leaned back in my chair. You want me to help you build a case against my former employer? Against criminals who happen to be running your former employer, Walsh corrected. There's a difference. And if I say no? Walsh's expression remained neutral. Then we continue our work without you. It will take longer. Some guilty parties might escape justice. But we'll get there eventually. And if I say yes? You'd be compensated as a consultant. Protected as a whistleblower. And when this is over, your professional reputation would be more than restored, you'd be vindicated. I stood and walked to the window, which had returned to transparency. From this height, the city looked orderly, logical, each building and street precisely where it should be. But I knew better now. I knew about the rot beneath the gleaming surfaces. I need time to think, I said finally. Walsh nodded. Understandable. But not too much time. Things are accelerating since your termination. They're nervous, which makes them dangerous. As I turned to leave, Walsh added one more thing, Ms. Sullivan? Whatever you decide, watch your digital footprint. They'll be looking for any sign you're still accessing their systems. The warning followed me out of the building and into the bright morning. I walked several blocks, mind racing, before finally hailing a ride home. Walsh had given me a lot to process, not just the scale of the fraud but the implications of my own involvement moving forward. Back in my apartment, I implemented enhanced security protocols, changing passwords, enabling multi-factor authentication on all accounts, setting up alerts for any attempts to access my personal devices. Then I made tea and sat by the window, thinking. What Walsh was asking wasn't simple. It wasn't just about providing information I already had, he wanted me to actively gather new evidence. To use my knowledge of Horizon's systems to document criminal activity in real time. The legal and personal risks were significant. My phone chimed with a notification. An email from Victoria Reeves to all Horizon employees had been forwarded to me by a former colleague. As many of you know, we recently made the difficult decision to part ways with Maya Sullivan. While we appreciate her years of service, we must emphasize that her departure was due to ongoing insubordination and increasingly erratic behavior regarding financial protocols. Rest assured that our financial systems remain sound, and the upcoming defense contract audit will proceed as scheduled under the capable leadership of Rebecca Winters. My hands tightened around my phone. Erratic behavior. They were setting the stage to discredit anything I might say publicly. A second notification followed, a message from a former colleague in IT. They're scrubbing your digital presence from company systems. Even your contribution to the risk assessment framework is being reattributed. Rebecca is taking credit for your work. Something cold and clarifying washed through me. This wasn't just about covering up fraud anymore. They were systematically erasing my professional legacy, my years of work, my very existence within the company I had helped build. I opened my laptop and began working. First, I documented everything I legally had access to, every piece of evidence I'd gathered before my termination, organized and annotated. Then I mapped out Horizon's digital architecture from memory, identifying potential access points that might still exist. By evening, I had made my decision. I called Walsh. I'm in, I said when he answered. But on my terms. I won't break laws. I won't hack systems. I'll only use access that legitimately remains available to me through oversights in their termination process. Understood, Walsh replied. When can you start? I already have. The next morning, I met Walsh at a secure facility operated by his firm. Unlike the sleek corporate office of our first meeting, this was a windowless space filled with high-end computing equipment and staffed by serious-looking analysts. Welcome to what we call the vault, Walsh said as he led me through security. Everything here is air-gapped from external networks. Completely secure. He introduced me to a small team, former financial crimes investigators, cybersecurity experts, and legal advisors. These would be my collaborators for what Walsh was calling Operation Meridian. Your workspace, he said, showing me to a dedicated station. Everything you need should be here, but let us know if you require additional resources. I sat down and immediately began configuring the environment to my specifications. The team watched with undisguised interest as I moved through setup processes with practiced efficiency. First, I explained as I worked, we need to understand exactly what they're changing and when. The audit is scheduled for next Tuesday. They'll be working frantically to cover their tracks before external auditors arrive. I created a secure connection to access my still active legacy test account. As I suspected, they had overlooked it in their haste to remove my primary credentials. Through this limited window, I could observe system logs without altering anything, completely passive reconnaissance. There, I pointed to the screen as data began flowing. They're rewriting transaction histories for the shell companies I identified. Changing timestamps, modifying approval chains. Walsh leaned in. Can you document this process as it happens? Better than that, I replied. I can show you exactly what they're changing, who's making the changes, and what the original records contained. Over the next 2 days, I worked nearly around the clock, sleeping on a cot in a side room when exhaustion demanded it. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of conspiracy, dozens of people across multiple departments working to conceal financial crimes on an industrial scale. Victoria Reeves appeared frequently in the logs, directing operations with cold efficiency. Marcus Chen from Legal reviewed and approved documentation changes. And Rebecca Winters, my replacement, was systematically dismantling the very safeguards I had built to prevent this kind of fraud. But the most damning evidence came on the third day. A secure video conference between Victoria, Lawrence Blackwood, and 3 government officials whose faces I recognized from news coverage. They discussed the upcoming audit with explicit references to what needed to remain hidden. If anyone asks about the Singapore transfers, Blackwood said, his voice crisp through the recorded audio, the official position is that they were approved under Special Authorization Code Sierra 9. That should shut down further inquiry. And if it doesn't? One of the officials asked. Victoria's response was chilling, then we have other means of ensuring compliance. Walsh watched the footage with me, his expression grim. This is exactly what we needed. Direct evidence of intent to deceive federal auditors. By the end of the week, we had compiled overwhelming evidence, financial records, communications, video conferences, and system logs showing deliberate manipulation of data. The case against Horizon's leadership was becoming ironclad. What happens now? I asked Walsh as we reviewed our findings. Now we bring in the federal prosecutors, he said. This goes beyond SEC violations. We're looking at conspiracy, fraud against the government, potentially even charges under the Espionage Act for some parties. How long until they move? Days, not weeks. The evidence is too compelling to delay. That evening, as I prepared to leave the vault, Walsh stopped me. Maya, there's something else you should know. His expression was unusually grave. We've been monitoring chatter around you. Horizon has hired a digital intelligence firm to investigate your activities post-termination. They're looking for any evidence you've accessed their systems. A chill ran through me. Have they found anything? Not yet. But they're motivated and well-resourced. You need to be extremely careful. I nodded, already mentally reviewing my digital footprint, identifying vulnerabilities. We can provide security if you'd like, Walsh offered. Physical and digital. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain complete independence. But I was smart enough to recognize the threat. Digital monitoring would be appreciated. But I can handle my physical security. That night, I implemented additional protective measures, relocating temporarily to a hotel under a different name, using only cash, carrying a burner phone for essential communications. As I settled into the anonymous hotel room, my regular phone chimed with a notification. An email from an unfamiliar address, but the subject line made my heart race. We know what you're doing. I opened it cautiously, using secure protocols. Ms. Sullivan, your activities have not gone unnoticed. Before you proceed further, consider a mutually beneficial arrangement. Your skills are valuable. Your silence would be compensated generously. Reply to this address within 24 hours if you wish to discuss terms. No signature. No specific threats. Just the implication that they were watching and willing to pay for my cooperation. I forwarded the email to Walsh, then shut down the phone. Entirely. They were getting nervous. Good. The next morning, I arrived at the vault to find increased security and a palpable tension among the team. Walsh met me at the entrance, his expression tense. They've accelerated their timeline, he said without preamble. The audit has been moved up to tomorrow. They're making their final moves. Inside, the team had been expanded. New analysts pored over data streams, tracking real-time changes to Horizon's financial systems. They're purging records at an unprecedented rate, one analyst reported. Entire transaction histories for the shell companies are being wiped and replaced. I moved to my workstation, fingers flying across the keyboard. They're panicking. Making mistakes. Sure enough, in their haste to cover their tracks, Horizon's team was creating new inconsistencies, timestamp mismatches, authorization codes that didn't align with access logs, deletion patterns that themselves formed damning evidence. Look here, I pointed to a particular sequence. Rebecca is using Victoria's credentials to modify audit logs, but she's forgetting to update the corresponding verification hashes. It's creating a perfect record of their tampering. As we worked, Walsh received a call that changed everything. His expression shifted from concern to something like grim satisfaction. Federal agents will be executing search warrants at Horizon headquarters tomorrow morning, he announced to the team. We need to finalize all documentation today. Nothing can be missed. The news energized the room. This was what we had been working toward, the moment when justice would begin to unfold. For me, the feeling was more complex. Vindication, yes. But also a strange emptiness. The company I had dedicated 8 years to was about to be exposed for criminal fraud at the highest levels. People I had worked alongside would face serious charges. The ripple effects would impact thousands of innocent employees. Having second thoughts? Walsh asked quietly, noticing my expression. I shook my head. No. Just processing what comes next. For them? Prosecution. For you? Vindication. I nodded, but something still felt unresolved. There's one more thing I need to do before tomorrow. That evening, I used the secure systems at the vault to compose one final email. Not to Victoria or the board or anyone at Horizon directly. Instead, I wrote to the company's all-staff list, every employee from entry-level to senior management. The subject line was simple, the truth about my departure. In clear, factual language, I explained what I had discovered about the Meridian project. I detailed the fraud I had uncovered, the response from leadership when I raised concerns, and the real reason for my termination. I included just enough evidence to be credible without compromising the ongoing investigation. I concluded with, tomorrow, federal agents will be arriving at Horizon headquarters with search warrants. I tell you this not to create panic, but to give those of you uninvolved in these activities time to prepare mentally. The company we believed in has been corrupted at its highest levels, but that doesn't negate the honest work done by most of you. The truth matters. Integrity matters. Remember that in the days ahead. I showed the draft to Walsh, who reviewed it with the legal team. After some minor revisions to ensure it wouldn't interfere with the federal case, they approved it. At precisely 8 p.m., when I knew the executive team would be in their daily end-of-day meeting, I sent the email. Then I shut down all systems. And waited. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone exploded with messages from former colleagues, shock, support, questions, gratitude for the warning. Some expressed disbelief. Others shared that they had noticed concerning patterns but had been afraid to speak up. At 9:17 p.m., Victoria attempted damage control with her own all-staff email. Ms. Sullivan's claims are false and defamatory. Legal action is being pursued. All operations will continue normally tomorrow. But it was too late. The truth was out, spreading through the company like wildfire. By morning, it would reach beyond Horizon's walls to the broader industry, to clients, to the public. As midnight approached, I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring federal agents, search warrants, arrests, headlines. The carefully constructed fraud would collapse, taking with it the careers and freedom of those responsible. I thought about Rebecca Winters, who had agreed to become my replacement, perhaps not understanding the full extent of what she was enabling. About colleagues who had looked away when I was escorted out. About systems I had built being used to conceal crimes. But mostly I thought about the moment in that conference room when Victoria had called me insubordinate for doing exactly what my job required, maintaining financial integrity regardless of pressure from above. Insubordination, I whispered to the night air. The word no longer stung. Instead, it felt like a badge of honor. Sometimes refusing to follow orders is the only ethical choice. My phone buzzed with a text from Walsh, all systems go for tomorrow. Get some rest. Rest seemed impossible with so much hanging in the balance. But I had done everything I could. The truth was in motion now, unstoppable, gathering momentum with each passing hour. They had fired me to silence me. Instead, they had set me free to speak the truth more loudly than ever before. I woke before dawn, the sky outside my hotel window still dark blue and scattered with fading stars. Sleep had come in broken fragments, my mind cycling through scenarios, contingencies, possibilities. But now, with the moment of truth approaching, a strange calm settled over me. The kind of clarity that comes when months of uncertainty crystallize into a single defining day. My phone buzzed at precisely 6:30 a.m. Walsh. It's happening. Turn on Channel 7. I grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. The local morning news was showing a live feed outside Horizon headquarters. Police vehicles and unmarked federal SUVs lined the street. Agents and windbreakers emblazoned with FBI were entering the building. The reporter's voice was breathless with excitement. Federal agents are executing search warrants at Horizon Dynamics headquarters in what sources describe as an investigation into defense contract fraud potentially reaching hundreds of millions of dollars. We're told several high-ranking executives are expected to be taken in for questioning. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching history unfold in real time. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about systems of accountability working as they should. About truth finally breaking through layers of deception. My phone lit up with messages from former colleagues, many of whom had arrived at work only to be told to go home as federal agents secured the building and began seizing records. "Is this because of your email last night?" one texted. "No," I replied honestly. "This investigation has been underway for months. My email just gave you warning." By 9 a.m., I was back at the vault, where Walsh's team had transformed part of the facility into a coordination center. Screens displayed news feeds, social media monitoring, and real-time updates from contacts within law enforcement. "Victoria Reeves is being brought in for questioning," an analyst announced, reading from a secure message. "Marcus Chen as well. They're cooperating separately." Walsh nodded, unsurprised. "They'll turn on each other quickly. People like that always do when cornered." I watched the information flow, feeling oddly detached. There was satisfaction in seeing justice in motion, but also a hollowness. My career, my reputation, my sense of professional identity, these things remained in limbo. Vindication wasn't the same as restoration. "What happens to me now?" I asked Walsh quietly. He regarded me thoughtfully. "That depends. As a whistleblower, you have certain protections. There will likely be congressional hearings where your testimony would be valuable. Beyond that, your expertise is more in demand than ever." Before I could respond, a commotion near the main screens drew our attention. Breaking news banners flashed across multiple channels. "Lawrence Blackwood has been taken into custody," the announcer stated gravely. "The former Deputy Secretary of Defense and current chairman of Horizon Dynamics is facing multiple federal charges, including conspiracy, fraud, and misappropriation of government funds." The room fell silent as footage showed Blackwood being escorted into a federal building, his usually commanding presence diminished by the circumstances. This was the power broker who had barely acknowledged my existence during our few encounters. Now he would know my name all too well. "They never thought it would come to this," I said, almost to myself. "People at that level believe they're untouchable." Walsh's expression was grim. "No one is untouchable. Sometimes it just takes longer for accountability to catch up with those at the top." Throughout the day, developments came rapidly. Search warrants revealed evidence even beyond what we had documented. Federal agents discovered hidden servers containing parallel financial records. Offshore accounts were frozen. Additional conspirators were identified. By late afternoon, the first official statement came from the Department of Justice. "Today's actions represent the initial phase of what appears to be one of the largest defense contract fraud cases in recent history. The investigation is ongoing, with cooperation from multiple agencies." At 5 p.m., Walsh received a call that he took privately. When he returned, his expression was difficult to read. "That was the lead federal prosecutor," he said. "They want to meet with you tomorrow morning. Your testimony will be central to their case." I nodded, not entirely surprised. "Of course. Whatever they need." "There's more," Walsh continued. "Victoria Reeves is already negotiating. She's offering information about higher-level involvement in exchange for consideration in her own case." "Is she implicating Blackwood?" "Yes. And others. Government officials. Defense contractors." This is expanding beyond Horizon rapidly. As evening approached, Walsh insisted I return to the secure hotel, escorted by his security team. "Tomorrow will be intense. You need rest and preparation." In the hotel room, I stood by the window watching the city lights blink on as dusk settled. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from a name I hadn't expected to see, Rebecca Winters. I opened it cautiously. "Maya, I don't expect forgiveness or understanding. I was brought in specifically to replace you, told only that you were difficult and uncooperative. I didn't know what I was enabling until it was too late. When I realized the scale of what was happening, I felt trapped. Today, I provided federal agents with additional evidence. It won't erase my complicity, but perhaps it helps balance the scales somewhat. What you did took extraordinary courage. Rebecca." I read it twice, unsure how to feel. There was no satisfaction in another person's downfall, even someone who had participated in my professional execution. Just a sad recognition that systems of corruption rarely stop at one victim. I drafted a brief reply: "Thank you for doing the right thing, even belatedly. The truth matters more than either of our roles in this story." After sending it, I ordered room service and tried to relax, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges. The news continued to update throughout the evening. Horizon stock had been halted after plummeting 37%. The board had issued an emergency statement distancing themselves from the actions of a few individuals, a transparent attempt to contain the damage. Just after midnight, another email arrived, this one from Eleanor at the SEC. Maya, you did it. What you've helped uncover goes beyond anything we initially suspected. The Commission is formally opening additional investigations based on today's findings. This isn't just about one company anymore. This is about systemic issues across defense contracting. We'll need your expertise in the weeks ahead. But first, congratulations. Few have the courage to stand alone against this kind of corruption and see it through. Eleanor, I slept better that night, Eleanor's words settling something inside me. I had done what was right, not what was easy. In a world that often rewarded compliance over conscience, that counted for something. The meeting with federal prosecutors the next morning was held in a secure conference room at the Department of Justice. 3 prosecutors, 2 FBI agents, and Walsh were present as I walked them through everything I had discovered, from the first financial irregularities to the systematic cover-up attempts. Ms. Sullivan, the lead prosecutor, said when I finished, "Your documentation is exceptional. The clarity of evidence, the thoroughness of your analysis, it's rare to see whistleblower evidence presented with this level of professionalism." "I'm a financial analyst," I replied simply. "Documentation is what I do." "Well, you've done it extraordinarily well in this case. We'll need you to be available for grand jury testimony next week. After that, depending on how defendants respond, we may or may not need trial testimony." I nodded. "Whatever is needed." As the meeting concluded, one of the FBI agents handed me a card. "We're always looking for people with your skills and integrity. When this is over, I hope you'll consider consulting with our Financial Crimes Division." Outside the building, Walsh waited with an update. "Victoria Reeves has agreed to full cooperation. She's implicating Lawrence Blackwood in everything." "No honor among thieves," I murmured. "There's something else," Walsh said, his tone shifting. "The interim management at Horizon has reached out through their new legal team. They want to talk to you." I stared at him, surprised. "About what?" "Damage control, primarily. But also," he hesitated, "they're floating the possibility of bringing you back." The suggestion was so unexpected I actually laughed. "They fire me for doing my job, then want me back after I expose massive fraud? That's not how this works." Walsh shrugged. "Desperate times. The company is in free fall. They need someone who understands the financial architecture and has credibility." "No," I said firmly. "That chapter is closed." Over the next week, developments continued at a dizzying pace. Horizon announced the resignation of the entire board. Trading of the company's stock resumed, but at less than half its previous value. Multiple class action lawsuits were filed by shareholders. Defense contracts were suspended pending full investigation. My grand jury testimony lasted 6 hours. I presented evidence calmly, factually, without emotion or embellishment. The truth needed no dramatic delivery, its weight spoke for itself. Afterward, the U.S. attorney thanked me personally. "Your courage has saved taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars and preserved the integrity of critical defense systems. Not many people would have stood their ground as you did." His words stayed with me as I left the courthouse, avoiding the press gathered outside. I wasn't interested in becoming the public face of this scandal. My goal had been truth and accountability, not publicity. That evening, alone in my apartment for the first time in days, I allowed myself to truly process everything that had happened. The company I had dedicated 8 years to was fundamentally different now, leadership dismantled, reputation shattered, future uncertain. Hundreds of innocent employees faced professional uncertainty through no fault of their own. Yet amid the wreckage, something important had been accomplished. A massive fraud had been exposed. Powerful people who believed themselves above accountability were facing justice. Systems designed to detect wrongdoing had ultimately worked, even if they required one person willing to risk everything to activate them. My phone rang, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Maya Sullivan." A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "My name is Catherine Zhao. I'm the newly appointed interim CEO at Horizon Dynamics." I said nothing, waiting. "I know this call is unexpected," she continued. "I've spent the past 3 days reviewing the situation here. The scale of the fraud is staggering, as is the courage it took to expose it." "What do you want, Ms. Zhao?" I asked directly. "To offer you your job back," she said. "Not your old position, a new one. Chief Compliance Officer, reporting directly to me and the new board. Complete authority to rebuild our financial oversight systems properly. I nearly ended the call then. The audacity was breathtaking. You must be desperate. Desperate? She paused. No. Strategic. Horizon needs to completely rebuild its credibility. Having the whistleblower who exposed the fraud lead that rebuilding sends a powerful message about our commitment to change. It would be good PR, I acknowledged coldly. But I have no interest in returning to Horizon. I understand your hesitation, Zhao said. But consider this, thousands of innocent employees' livelihoods depend on Horizon surviving this crisis. People who had nothing to do with the fraud. You exposed the corruption because you believe in integrity. Those same principles might now be served by helping rebuild something better from the ashes. Her appeal to the broader impact gave me pause. I had been focused on bringing down the guilty parties, but hadn't fully considered the collateral damage to honest employees. I appreciate the offer, I said finally. But I need time to consider my options. Of course. The offer remains open. She provided her direct number before ending the call. I sat in silence afterward, turning the conversation over in my mind. Return to Horizon? The thought seemed absurd on its face. Yet part of me recognized the poetic justice in helping transform the very company that had discarded me. The next morning brought a different kind of offer. Terrence Walsh invited me to breakfast at a quiet cafe away from the financial district. I've been authorized to make you a formal offer, he said after we ordered. Integrity Financial Investigations would like you to join us as a senior director, heading a new division focused on defense sector compliance. The offer was substantial, significantly above my previous compensation at Horizon, with equity, participation and considerable autonomy. Your experience is unique, Walsh continued. You understand both the technical systems and the human factors that enable fraud at this scale. That combination is incredibly valuable. Unlike the Horizon offer, this one resonated. Working to prevent similar fraud across the industry aligned with my values and skills. I'm interested, I told him. But I need a few days before making any decisions. Walsh nodded. Take the time you need. We're building something important here, Maya. Your perspective would be invaluable. By the end of the week, I had received 7 job offers, from government agencies, private firms, even a prestigious university seeking someone to develop financial forensics curriculum. Opportunities one couldn't have imagined 2 weeks earlier were now competing for my attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria had threatened that I would learn how small this industry can be when someone doesn't play by its rules. She had been right about the industry's connectedness, but wrong about everything else. Standing by principles hadn't diminished my options, it had expanded them exponentially. On Friday evening, Eleanor Vega invited me for dinner at her home, away from offices and official settings. I've heard about your job offers, she said as we sat on her patio, the summer evening warm around us. Quite the bidding war developing. I smiled faintly. Apparently exposing $500 million in fraud makes one marketable. It's more than that, Eleanor said, swirling her wine thoughtfully. What makes you valuable isn't just that you found the fraud. It's that you refuse to look away. That quality is rare, Maya. Rarer than any technical skill. We talked late into the evening, not just about career options but about larger questions of purpose and impact. Eleanor had walked a similar path years earlier, choosing public service after uncovering irregularities at her former investment firm. Whatever you choose, she said as I was leaving, make sure it lets you sleep at night. That's the real measure. Her words stayed with me through the weekend as I weighed my options. By Sunday evening, I had made my decision. Monday morning, I called Catherine Zhao at Horizon. I appreciate your offer, I told her, but I won't be returning to Horizon. I understand, she said, disappointment evident in her voice. May I ask which opportunity you're pursuing? I've accepted a position with Integrity Financial Investigations. I'll be heading their new defense sector compliance division. A worthy choice, Zhao acknowledged. Though I still believe you could have made a powerful difference here. Perhaps, I agreed. But sometimes the most important thing isn't fixing what was broken. It's building something better elsewhere. After ending the call, I emailed Walsh to formally accept his offer. His response came within minutes, excellent decision. We start building tomorrow. That evening, I stood on my apartment balcony watching the sunset paint the city in golden shadow. In the distance, Horizon Tower caught the last rays of light, its windows gleaming. Once, I had measured my professional worth by my position there. Now I understood that true value came from something more fundamental, the courage to stand for integrity, regardless of cost. The news had moved on to other stories. The initial shock of the Horizon fraud had been replaced by detailed Analysis of systemic issues in defense contracting. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Regulatory reforms were being discussed. The ripple effects would continue for years. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Former Horizon Dynamics CEO Victoria Reeves pleads guilty to conspiracy charges in defense contract fraud case. I set the phone down without reading further. Victoria's fate no longer defined mine. Our paths had diverged permanently the moment she chose to fire me rather than address the issues I'd uncovered. Looking out at the city stretching before me, I felt something I hadn't expected, not triumph or vindication, but a profound sense of freedom. For 8 years, I had built my identity around my role at Horizon. Now I was building something new, defined not by a company but by principles that transcended any single organization. The path forward wasn't about revenge or even justice anymore. It was about creating systems where integrity wasn't the exception, but the expectation. Where those who stood for truth weren't labeled insubordinate but recognized as essential. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new systems to understand, new forms of deception to uncover. But tonight, in this moment of transition, I allowed myself to simply appreciate the journey. From fired to fighting back. From silence to speaking truth. From one woman standing alone to part of a larger movement for accountability. They had fired me for insubordination, when what they really feared was my integrity. They had needed me gone because I wouldn't look away from uncomfortable truths. They had tried to erase my professional identity to protect their criminal enterprise. But in doing so, they had inadvertently set me free to become something more powerful than I had ever been within their walls. Not just a financial analyst doing her job, but a voice for systemic change. I smiled as the last light faded from the horizon. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges. But tonight, this victory, not just over corruption but over fear itself, was worth savoring. 6 months passed in a blur of purpose and progress. My office at Integrity Financial Investigations overlooked the same skyline but from a different angle, a shift in perspective that mirrored my professional transformation. Where once I had worked within a single company's framework, I now helped reshape standards across the entire defense contracting sector. The Meridian report is ready for your final review, said Alexis, my deputy director, placing a tablet on my desk. Congressional testimony is scheduled for Thursday. I nodded, taking the device. How many companies have implemented the new compliance protocols? 17 so far. For more pending by month's end. She smiled slightly. They're calling it the Sullivan Standard in industry circles. The name caught me off guard. They're what? The Sullivan Standard. It's become shorthand for the enhanced oversight framework you designed. Apparently, no one wants to be the company that doesn't meet it. I shook my head, amused and slightly embarrassed by the eponym. 6 months ago, Victoria Reeves had been working to erase my contributions from Horizon's history. Now my name was becoming synonymous with financial integrity across an entire industry. After Alexis left, I reviewed the Meridian report, our comprehensive analysis of how the Horizon fraud had happened and, more importantly, how similar schemes could be prevented. The report would form the foundation of my testimony before the Senate Defense Appropriations Committee. My phone buzzed with a text from Walsh, turn on Channel 7. Sentencing announcement. I switched on the office television just in time to see the news banner, former Horizon Dynamics chairman Lawrence Blackwood sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The camera showed Blackwood being led from the courthouse, the once imposing figure now diminished in standard clothing, flanked by U.S. Marshals. The reporter's voice provided context. This sentence represents one of the harshest penalties ever imposed in a defense contract fraud case, reflecting what the judge called an extraordinary breach of trust with profound national security implications. I watched silently, feeling no joy in Blackwood's downfall, only a somber satisfaction that accountability had finally reached even the highest levels. Victoria Reeves had received a reduced sentence of 7 years in exchange for her cooperation. Marcus Chen, 6 years. Others involved had negotiated various plea deals. The Horizon name itself was gone now. After the scandal broke, the company had been acquired by a competitor, broken into parts, and rebranded. Thousands of innocent employees had found positions elsewhere, many bringing with them a newfound appreciation for compliance protocols. I switched off the television and returned to preparing for my testimony. The congressional hearing would mark a pivotal moment in transforming individual accountability into systemic change. The stakes couldn't be higher. Thursday morning arrived clear and crisp, the autumn air energizing as I walked up the steps of the Senate office building. Walsh met me at security. Ready? He asked, his expression supportive but serious. As ready as anyone can be to face a Senate committee, I replied. Inside, the hearing room was already filled with staffers, industry representatives, media, and curious members of the public. I recognized several faces: Eleanor from the SEC, prosecutors from the Horizon case, even Catherine Zhao, who had successfully transitioned the remains of Horizon into its new corporate identity. At precisely 10 a.m., the committee chairman called the session to order. Today we continue our examination of fraud and oversight failures in defense contracting, with special focus on preventative measures moving forward. Our first witness is Maya Sullivan, former senior financial analyst at Horizon Dynamics and current director of defense sector compliance at Integrity Financial Investigations. I took my seat at the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and began the testimony I had prepared so carefully. Not just recounting what had happened at Horizon, but outlining the structural vulnerabilities that made it possible. The fundamental issue, I explained, isn't just criminal intent by individuals, but systems designed with inadequate transparency. The Sullivan Standard, I paused, still uncomfortable with the name, the enhanced oversight framework we've developed addresses these vulnerabilities through three core principles: distributed verification, pattern recognition algorithms, and protected reporting channels for financial analysts. For nearly 2 hours, I answered questions from senators on both sides of the aisle. Some were genuinely interested in solutions. Others seemed more concerned with political positioning. All received the same measured, factual responses from me. Ms. Sullivan, one senator asked toward the end, you personally paid a significant price for your integrity. Your career was derailed, your reputation was temporarily damaged, and you faced potential industry blacklisting. What would you say to other financial professionals who might find themselves in similar situations but fear the consequences of speaking up? The question cut through the technical discussions to something more fundamental. I considered my answer carefully. I would tell them that integrity isn't just a professional obligation, it's a form of freedom. When you compromise your principles for job security, you become imprisoned by that compromise. Each concession demands another, until you no longer recognize the person you've become. I paused, making eye contact with the senator. I won't pretend the path I took was easy. It wasn't. But I sleep soundly knowing I chose truth over comfort. That's a form of wealth that doesn't appear on any balance sheet. The hearing concluded with the committee chairman thanking me for my extraordinary service to taxpayers and national security. As I gathered my materials to leave, several senators approached to shake my hand, their staff already discussing how elements of the Sullivan Standard might be incorporated into upcoming legislation. Outside the hearing room, reporters clustered with questions. I provided brief, careful responses before Walsh skillfully extracted me from the crowd. You did well in there, he said as we walked toward the exit. Better than well. You were authoritative without being technical, principled without being sanctimonious. Exactly the right tone. Let's hope it makes a difference, I replied. Testimony without implementation is just words. It's already making a difference. 3. More companies called this morning wanting to implement the framework proactively. They see which way the wind is blowing. As we reached the building's entrance, I spotted a familiar face waiting near the security checkpoint, Rebecca Winters, my replacement at Horizon who had eventually cooperated with investigators. Maya, she said, approaching hesitantly. I watched your testimony. It was illuminating. I nodded, unsure of her purpose. Rebecca had avoided prosecution through her eventual cooperation but had struggled professionally in the aftermath of the scandal. I'm starting a new position next week, she continued. Compliance Director at Meridian Defense Systems. They're implementing your framework from the ground up. She paused, seeming to gather courage. I was hoping you might be willing to consult. Help me get it right this time. The request surprised me. Rebecca had been part of the system designed to replace and discredit me. Yet here she was, seeking guidance to build something better. Send me the details, I said after a moment. I can't promise hands-on involvement, but I can connect you with our implementation team. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. I know I don't deserve your help. This isn't about deserving, I replied. It's about building better systems. That's bigger than any history between us. Later that evening, I found myself back on my apartment balcony, watching the city lights emerge as dusk settled. My phone had been buzzing constantly since the hearing, journalists seeking interviews, companies requesting consultations, former colleagues offering congratulations. One message stood out, an email from a financial analyst at another defense contractor. Watched your testimony today. I found similar patterns in our Jakarta project but have been afraid to report upward. Your words gave me courage. How do I proceed correctly? I sat down immediately to craft a detailed response, outlining secure documentation methods, appropriate reporting channels, and legal protections. I included my private number in case they needed direct support. This, I realized, was the real Measure of impact, not my testimony before senators or my name attached to compliance standards, but individuals finding courage through example. One person standing up created permission for others to do the same. A knock at my door interrupted these thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw Eleanor Vega holding what appeared to be a bottle of champagne. "I come bearing celebration supplies," she said when I opened the door. That testimony today was a masterclass in turning personal adversity into systemic change. I welcomed her in, finding glasses while she opened the champagne. "To the Sullivan Standard," she toasted, raising her glass. "May it make my job at the SEC much easier." I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "I still can't believe they're calling it that." "Get used to it. Names stick when they represent something people need." Eleanor settled onto my couch. "So what's next for you? You've helped launch an industry-wide transformation, testified before Congress, and it's only been 6 months since this all began. Most people would take a vacation." The question made me pause. I'd been so focused on the work, on building solutions, that I hadn't considered what might come after this initial phase. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "There's still so much to do with implementation." Eleanor studied me over the rim of her glass. "You know, when I left private industry for the SEC, everyone told me I was crazy. Trading a 7-figure salary for government service. But it gave me something money couldn't buy, the chance to fix systems, not just work within them." "Are you recruiting me?" I asked, amused. "Maybe. We need people who've been in the trenches. Who understand both the technical details and the human factors." She set her glass down. "But that's not a conversation for tonight. Tonight is for celebrating a significant victory. Not just yours personally, but for the concept of accountability itself." We talked late into the evening, not just about work, but about the journey of the past 6 months, the challenges, the unexpected allies, the moments of doubt and breakthrough. By the time Eleanor left, my perspective had shifted slightly. I had been so focused on looking forward that I hadn't properly acknowledged how far I'd already come. The next morning, I woke to news that 3 more executives from companies associated with the Horizon fraud had been indicted. The ripple effects continued to spread, accountability expanding beyond a single company to an entire network of corruption. At the office, Walsh called me into a meeting with the firm's founding partners. They had a proposal that caught me completely off guard. "We're establishing a new public interest division," Walsh explained. "Focused on training the next generation of financial oversight professionals. Teaching them not just technical skills but ethical frameworks." He slid a folder across the table. "We'd like you to lead it." I opened the folder to find a detailed proposal, a training academy of sorts, partnering with universities and regulatory bodies to create certification programs in financial ethics and fraud prevention. "This is ambitious," I said, scanning the materials. "So is exposing $500 million in fraud," one of the partners replied. "Yet here we are." The opportunity was compelling, a chance to scale impact beyond individual cases or even industry standards. To shape how the next generation of financial professionals approached questions of integrity and oversight. "I'll need to think about this," I said, closing the folder. Walsh nodded. "Take the time you need. But know that this is a direct result of what you've already built. The Sullivan Standard is changing industry practices. Imagine what a Sullivan Academy could do for professional culture." Throughout that day, I couldn't stop thinking about the proposal. It represented a different kind of influence, less direct but potentially more transformative over time. Building not just better systems but better stewards of those systems. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Catherine Zhao. The interim CEO who had helped transition Horizons remains into their new corporate identity. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she began. "I wanted to personally thank you for your testimony yesterday. It provided crucial context for the industry. Moving forward." "Just doing my part," I replied, curious about her real purpose. "I'm calling because I've accepted a new position," she continued. "Special Advisor to the Secretary of Defense on Procurement Integrity. I'll be helping implement many of the frameworks you've developed across all defense contracting." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That's a powerful platform for change." "It is. And I'd like your input as we build out the implementation strategy. Not as a formal consultant necessarily, but as someone whose insights would be invaluable." The request was flattering but also represented something significant: the frameworks I developed were moving beyond private industry into government policy. The potential scale of impact was exponentially larger. "I'd be happy to contribute," I told her. "Send me the details and we'll arrange time." After ending the call, I returned to my balcony, watching the city as thoughts crystallized about my next steps. The training academy. The policy implementation. the individual analysts reaching out for guidance. All represented different facets of the same fundamental mission, transforming how financial oversight functioned at every level. My phone buzzed with a news alert: Sullivan's Standard for Financial Oversight adopted by Department of Defense for all future contracts. I smiled at the headline, no longer uncomfortable with my name being attached to the framework. It wasn't about personal recognition but about setting a benchmark that others could refer to, implement, and eventually improve upon. The next morning, I called Walsh and accepted the position leading the new training division. The work would allow me to split my time between developing educational frameworks and continuing to advise on implementation of the oversight standards. Excellent decision, Walsh said. When can you start the transition? I already have, I replied. I've been drafting curriculum outlines since last night. He laughed. Of course you have. Your capacity for forward momentum is unmatched. Over the following weeks, my focus shifted from reactive investigation to proactive education. I worked with universities to develop specialized courses, with regulatory bodies to create certification requirements, and with companies to establish internship programs that emphasized ethical frameworks alongside technical skills. The work was different from anything I'd done before, less about finding what was broken and more about building what could be better. It engaged different parts of my mind and spirit, creating a sense of purpose that extended beyond any single case or company. 3 months into this new role, I was invited to give the keynote address at the National Conference on Financial Ethics, a platform that would have been unimaginable a year earlier when I was being escorted from Horizon's offices with a box of personal belongings. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of financial professionals from across the country, I felt a moment of profound clarity about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I was fired for what was called insubordination, but was actually a refusal to look away from financial irregularities. That moment, painful as it was, forced me to confront a fundamental question: what happens when doing your job properly conflicts with keeping your job? The room was silent, hundreds of professionals confronting a scenario many had feared but few had openly discussed. The answer I discovered wasn't just about individual courage, though that's certainly part of it. It was about recognizing that true professional integrity isn't a luxury or a personal virtue, it's an essential safeguard for our entire financial system. I paused, making eye contact with audience members. Each of you will face moments when the easy path diverges from the right one. When pressure from above conflicts with responsibilities to shareholders, taxpayers, or the public trust. In those moments, remember that your greatest professional asset isn't technical knowledge or industry connections, it's your willingness to stand firmly for what's right, even when standing alone. As I continued, outlining the practical frameworks we were developing to support ethical decision-making, I noticed expressions changing throughout the audience, from polite interest to genuine engagement. These weren't abstract principles, but practical tools for navigating real-world dilemmas. The systems we're building together won't eliminate human frailty or criminal intent, I concluded. But they can create environments where integrity is rewarded rather than punished, where oversight is viewed as essential rather than obstructive, and where the courage to speak truth is recognized as our industry's most valuable currency. The applause that followed wasn't just courtesy but recognition, professionals acknowledging both the challenge and the opportunity in what I described. Afterward, dozens approached with questions, suggestions, and commitments to implement these frameworks in their own organizations. Later that evening, at the conference reception, Eleanor found me by the windows overlooking the city. Quite a journey from that cafe where we first discussed the Horizon irregularities, she observed, handing me a glass of sparkling water. I smiled, remembering how nervous I'd been that day, uncertain of what would follow but knowing I couldn't remain silent. From fired to keynote speaker in 12 months. Not the career path I had planned. The best paths rarely are planned, Eleanor replied. They're discovered by following principles rather than preset destinations. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the industry's leading figures networking across the ballroom. Many discussing implementation of the very standards that had emerged from my termination. You know what I find most remarkable? Eleanor said finally. They fired you to silence one voice. Instead, they created thousands of voices asking the same questions, demanding the same accountability. Her observation crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. My termination hadn't been an endpoint but a beginning, not just for my own journey but for a broader awakening across the financial oversight community. They needed me gone because they feared what one person might expose, I said. They never considered what might happen if that one person inspired others. Eleanor raised her glass. To unintended consequences. I clinked my glass against hers, watching the room full of professionals who were now implementing standards bearing my name, attending training programs I had designed, and carrying forward principles that had once cost me my job. They had fired me for insubordination, when what they truly feared was integrity that couldn't be compromised. They had needed me gone to protect their fraud, never imagining that my departure would ultimately expose it more completely than my continued employment ever could. The path from that moment of termination to this evening of industry recognition hadn't been straight or easy. It had required courage, persistence, and the support of unexpected allies. But standing here now, seeing the tangible impact spreading through systems and institutions, I understood something essential about transformation, both personal and systemic. True change doesn't come from working within broken systems. It comes from having the courage to stand outside them, to name what's broken, and to build better alternatives. Sometimes that process begins with a single moment of unwelcome truth. Like being fired for doing exactly what integrity demanded. As the evening continued, young analysts approached me for advice, senior executives discussed implementation challenges, and educators explored curriculum possibilities. Each conversation represented a ripple effect from that original moment of standing alone for what was right. They had fired me thinking it would end something. Instead, it had been just the beginning, not just of my own reinvention, but of a movement that was now larger than any individual or company. A movement toward systems where integrity wasn't just expected but structurally supported. Looking out at the city lights beyond the windows, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because the work was finished, it was really just beginning. But because I had found my true professional purpose. Not in any job title or company identity, but in the fundamental commitment to building systems where truth mattered more than comfort, where integrity outweighed expediency, and where doing what's right was recognized as the ultimate professional skill. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.